creditor, and acting for more than one bidder for a business being sold by auction.
So we hope that you can see there's no real change in policy in relation to conflicts of interest, but what you will notice is very different, is that there is no longer a specific prohibition in respect of acting for both sides in a conveyance. The intention here is that these types of conflict or potential conflict will be treated in the same way as any other situation where you're considering acting for more than one party, and you'll need to ask yourself the same questions as you would in any other conflict situation. So, for example, whether you could, well, in particular, whether you can act in the best interest of both clients. It's not intended to be a relaxation. We're not saying it's now acceptable to act for both sides routinely, and indeed in the notes of the chapter we do mention conveyancing as one of the high-risk areas, an area where there is a very high risk of conflict, and so we wouldn't expect solicitors routinely to be acting for both sides. And so at this point we'd like to ask you a couple of questions and to poll your views on the proposals. And the first question is whether you agree with the way that we deal with conflicts in the draft code, and you can vote on this just by pressing the relevant button.
That's very encouraging, thank you. We're seeing at the moment that 82% are saying yes, you do agree with the way we deal with conflicts, and 17% say no.
Well, we certainly take those views on board, and as I've said, this is very much part of the consultation process, and we're very grateful for your views on that. The second, is that finished now? The second question we'd like to ask, which will be coming up shortly, I think, is whether you think the position on conveyancing conflicts is clear. Again, this is simply a yes and no question. Oh,
yeah, getting slightly different views on that. About 80% of people are currently saying no, 19% are saying yes. So again, that's interesting, and maybe we need to do some more work on clarifying that.
I mean, we certainly would intend to issue quite clear guidance on these proposals, especially during the transition period, so it is very clear what we're expecting. But obviously it's important that the outcomes and the indicative behaviours are clear at the outset, so we'll certainly take that message on board.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, let's now turn to another chapter, chapter 12, which is about separate businesses. Again, this isn't meant to represent a change in policy from the current conduct provisions on separate businesses, which you'll find in Rule 21 of the current code. We consider that the current restrictions on the services that can be offered through a separate business provide important public protections, and this is particularly as our consumer research suggests that most consumers don't actually appreciate the difference between regulated and unregulated legal service providers.
Thank you. And as Tracy said, this is we see this as a very important consumer protection issue, and the whole purpose of this chapter is that clients who obtain their services from an SRA regulated firm are not confused as to the extent to which those services are regulated, particularly where some very similar services may be offered by a separate unregulated business. So looking at these first two outcomes, the first one states that you mustn't own or have a significant interest in or actively participate in a separate business which conducts prohibited separate business activities. And the second one is really talking about the ownership of your firm, which could possibly be an ABS going forward. and we refer here to prohibited separate business activities, and that term is defined, and it basically reflects the services that you're currently prohibited from offering through a separate business. And these are the mainstream legal services, really, the sort of activities that members of the public would expect to be offered through an SRA regulated business. And so they will be things like litigation, conveyancing, drafting wills and drafting legal documents. So moving on to the next outcome. This one deals with the situation where you are involved with a separate business, either because you have an interest in it or you own it. And this is about businesses that offer permitted separate business activities, and these will be services such as estate agency and financial services. These are the sort of services that people wouldn't necessarily expect to be offered only through a solicitor's firm or a regulated firm. So moving on to the indicative behaviours. No, sorry, the following outcomes. These are the outcomes which apply where you are involved with a separate business, and perhaps the most significant is outcome 4, which makes clear that you mustn't represent any of the services you offer or any of the people offering those services as being regulated by the SRA. So it's all about the public being clear about who regulates which services. If we look then at the indicative behaviours, again these give examples of how you can ensure that clients aren't confused, and in particular you must keep your records and client information separate, and of course you will need to comply with the accounts rules in respect of your SRA regulated business, and you will have to keep money separate that belongs to the permitted separate business.
Thanks, Jenny. At this point, we'd like to ask you a couple more questions. And again, please could you answer with your polling facilities. Firstly, do you agree with the way we deal with separate businesses? Thank you. That's coming through very clearly. A strong majority, 92% saying yes, you do agree. 7% saying no, you don't. Thank you for that feedback. We'll take that back to the office. The second question, do you think the position on separate businesses is clear? Again, please poll yes or no. Thank you. We're seeing about 77% saying yes, you think that's clear, 22% saying no, you don't. Thank you very much for that. That very much helps us with the work we're doing in the office. Okay. We're now moving to the end of the presentation. We'd like to remind you that we do welcome your comments and feedback. So thank you very much for taking part in the online poll this afternoon. You now have the opportunity to ask us questions either by phone or by email using your question and answer panel. You may also want to look at the latest version of the handbook on our website and take the time to still give us feedback through our consultation process. The deadline for responses to that is the 13th of January 2011. And also, please don't forget you can download today's presentations, and we've posted the website address on this sheet.
I think it's also worth mentioning the recently published policy statement, which looks at focus regulation more broadly. So it looks not only at the handbook, but also how we're going to authorise and supervise firms and enforce the regulatory requirements. That's also on our website.